I just remember afterwards, I was like, I just had so little control over what I was doing. I mean, it was truly like what they talk about where like you can't even think. It's like when you're on the range, you can have a swing thought. Here, there was no swing thought. There was just, survival. It's like you're in fight or flight, and you just have to hit this ball.
Today we're going to tackle an interesting question. What is it like to retire from the PGA Tour? And to help answer that question, we have the perfect guest, Mr. Martin Trainer, who has played on basically every tour there is: the Corn Ferry Tour, the European Tour, the Asian Tour, International Series. He tried to qualify for Live Golf, and he played mostly on the PGA Tour, and now he's here to tell us the secrets of professional golf. Martin will explain what it's like to retire, to call it quits, to realize it's time to hang it up, and then he's going to run us through 10 things that he learned. My name's Dylan Dethier. This is the Drop Zone. We're pumped to have you here. And here's Martin. Joining us now is the man himself, Mr. Martin Trainer, a veteran of just almost more tours than you could even list off. But the man is a PGA Tour winner. He's had success across Corn Ferry, Europe, various mini tours, various qualifying schools, and now Martin, do you have an announcement to make about the future of your professional golf career?
Yes, I do. After all those grueling years playing a variety of tours around the world and possibly outside of the world, like for all I know, I might have played another tour in outer space somewhere. The list is so long, there's no way to be sure. But I have officially decided to retire. I am no longer playing pro golf after this season, and I'm very excited about it. Yeah, I'm actually gonna start grad school. I'm gonna do an MFT program to become a therapist, and it's a career I've kind of had my eye on for the last few years as my career has been winding down. So yeah, I'm really excited.
It's gotta be a bit of a standout on like a grad school application, I would think. To be like, yeah, just played a bunch of years on the PGA Tour, especially for someone getting into therapy. I'm not sure how often they're seeing that.
Yeah, I imagine I might be one of one, but yeah, that is a good question. I'm sure they've had, some former performers or, athletes of some kind, but yeah, professional golfer could be a first.
Well, Martin, I wanted to have you on for a couple of reasons. One, because we've gotten to be friends over the last few years. Hopefully you also feel that way, and this isn't an awkward. Um, but no, I mean partly because in golf you don't really get retirements like other sports. Like professional athletes, not everyone gets like the Kobe Bryant retirement tour, but there's at least some sense of, okay, you're on a team and then the next year you're not on that team, but there's something that usually happens where you get to make an announcement or someone reports it, someone lets you know. The PGA Tour or professional golf in general, you can just kind of fade away. And that's, I think, what almost always happens. Or if you're, Fred Couples, you just keep playing professional golf until you're 66 years old. Um, so
All
it
right.
brings us to an interesting limbo. So I'm curious, like, what are the mechanics of it? Do you have to tell anyone that you're retiring, or can you just kind of stop signing up for things?
Yeah, like you said, you just kind of fade away. I mean, you know, even the top players go through this where like they're still technically active and playing and, they get into their 40s and then their 50s and they're there. But, there is kind of that point where it's like, it's clear 6 years later, like, oh yeah, they were probably done like 5 years ago. And, obviously those guys are still usually really, really high level players and especially the top guys, they always do something when they're 50. It's like every single top player in history, there's always like one moment when they're between 46 and 52 where they like have one last hurrah. But, it is very much like a slow decline because yeah, you're not like abruptly no longer on the team, especially those guys. But for me, who was just, not a top player, but just a journeyman, yeah, you just kind of, no one's really paying attention to what you're doing. You're just, one second you're playing all these tournaments, and the next second you're hopefully going to get into like this one and that one and parlay that into more events, but who knows? And then, enough time passes and it's kind of clear that you have to either start from the bottom and work your way up or do what I'm doing, which is pivoting.
All right, so Martin, you've jotted down sort of 10 topics or 10 general 10 things you learned as a professional golfer, and I just want to buzz through those and then see where we get to. And we'll start with the positive. Like, what's cool about the pro golf lifestyle? I think people have this sense like, this is the dream for every kid that grows up playing golf. You want to be a professional golfer. What lives up to the hype? What maybe exceeds it? What is cool about playing pro golf?
I think there's those exhilarating moments that I can't imagine you can experience outside of professional sports. It's the moment where you make a long putt and the crowd cheers. I think those are the types of things that they're just so thrilling. It's kind of a surreal out of body experience. If you're playing in front, 17 at Sawgrass, you're hitting that tee shot and you hit it on the green, or let's say you birdie that hole and like the crowd goes wild. I think those are sort of the peak experiences that are very surreal and kind of hard to wrap your mind around. I don't think it's a very natural experience to be put in that setting, but it's certainly extremely thrilling. And I think that part of it is, yeah, I don't think it can. I don't think the rest of my life will ever include a moment like that ever again.
Yeah, is
But
there
I think
something
there's another. Yeah, go ahead.
is there something addicting about that? Like once you feel the juice in that moment, then you're kind of taken aback, but then you're like, all right, how do I get back there?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of reminds me of comedians who talk about this, like being on stage and making everyone laugh and how addicting that can be. I don't really know if it is in that setting because there's always this background of pressure with golf where you're trying to perform. And so it's not just like, this moment where there's no pressure and you're just experiencing this elation. I think it's more complicated than that. You're really grinding and struggling, and you've had a long day already. You probably woke up super early to go to the gym, and then you're playing this stressful game, and so that kind of thing happens much later on. So you don't it doesn't sink in as much. Um,
All right, what
but
else is cool? What else do you have
yeah,
that's
yeah. I mean, I think just in terms of the lifestyle, I think what's cool about playing professional golf is that you always have a goal. You always have a new week. You always have something that you're working towards. I think, in our sort of modern lifestyle where, there's a lot of people that feel aimless and feel, disjointed and divorced from community. And, you have this sense of purpose, I think, with golf where you really get to pursue your goal. It's a craft. It's a craft that feels important and meaningful. And I think that part is I think it really grounds you. It allows you to continuously look forward to something. And so it's sort of a psychological catnip because you always have next week. Even if you bomb and miss the cut by 7 shots, you always can just do a couple tweaks on the range and hope it goes better next week.
that's really cool. That's an interesting way of looking at it. I mean, one of the things of getting to know the rhythm of professional golf a little bit, mostly from the outside, but just the difference in vibe from a Tuesday to a Friday, where like everyone's an optimist on
Everyone's
Tuesday,
so happy on Tuesday.
and then
That
Friday,
yeah,
at least at these events with cuts where more than half the field is going home, there's like a much different
right.
feel on the ground. So that's an interesting way to
Yeah.
put it.
Yeah, always go up to your favorite golfer and talk to them for the first time on a Tuesday. Never talk to them during the tournament or after the tournament. They're going to be exhausted, upset, probably. Even if they shot 65, it could have been 63. The Tuesday early week is when everyone's in a great mood.
All right. So what's difficult about professional golf? Obviously, like playing golf and being really, really good at it stands out. But what are your strongest impressions after these years of like what is hard about being a pro golfer?
I think we just talked about the good parts. I think, unfortunately, there's a lot of parts that are really challenging. especially from like a mental health standpoint. I think there's something really unnatural, I guess, about flying every week to a new location, living in a hotel, never truly having a sense of community, never like recognizing your surroundings, never having a routine that involves sort of the place that you're in. You might have your routine on the golf course, but it's not, you never wake up knowing where you are and having it feel like home. I think that's the hardest thing. I mean, a lot of players I know struggle with this very thing, and that's part of what inspired me to get into grad school and working in mental health and eventually becoming a therapist is because I think a lot of people struggle with this, golf wise or not. But we live sort of this lifestyle of being a little bit divorced from our community and constantly traveling and in different time zones and that can be better or worse depending on what tour you're playing. I'm just talking about the PGA Tour, which is actually much more confined to just the United States. Other tours, like I played the European Tour this past year, and that was just a whole new level of travel and challenges. And we can talk about that at some point, but yeah, that part of it I think is really hard, and it's no surprise that while there are some highs, it is actually a really challenging lifestyle, and I'm not gonna miss that aspect of it.
Yeah, I mean, we see sometimes, I know you made a point to, when you could get out and see the city and we'll see some guys do that. Like Victor Hovland, I think people always get a chuckle out of, oh, whatever. He's going to see the local sites, try to do something immersive, even though he's this, interesting, talented top pro. But I'm curious if you found like that was a way to find something normal or maybe at least connect with something in the place that you were other than like hotel golf course.
Yeah, I mean, you have to do that just to maintain your sanity to some degree. When you are in a new place, especially the first couple of years you're out there, you're trying to like really savor it and enjoy it. But, I remember my rookie year, I I randomly joined up with Rory Sabatini in a practice round. It was like my third event, and I foolishly asked Rory. I was like, hey, have you ever like how many times have you played this event? Like, do you usually play it, or have you played here before? As if he hadn't been out there for 25 years. And he just looks at me with a straight face, and he's like, I've played here for 24 straight years. And it's like at a certain point, you know, maybe he did go to the fun little museum that they have at the center of town 22 years ago.
Yeah, the hole in the
But
wall restaurant. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And maybe you have your little restaurant that you go to, but that the years add up, and I think it's harder as time goes on to get more excited about those things.
Yeah. Was there a certain um, part of the week, I guess, part of your golfing? Is it traveling? Is it, dealing with like missing a cut or not, or coming up short of your expectations? Does anything stand out as like, all right, this is when the doldrums would hit?
I mean, missing a cut is always the worst part of the week. You grind for this one goal, which is to at least make the cut, if not better. And when you fall short, it can be disappointing. I mean, I guess over time, you hopefully learn to cope with that and understand that, it's just another week and, there's ups and downs. But yeah, that that moment of missing the cut is always difficult.
All right. Next we have celebrity. And I'm curious how your own level of celebrity and then also your proximity to other mega golf celebrities. I'm curious what your impressions were of that as a phenomenon.
Yeah, it's one of the oddest things. I mean, I was never a true celebrity like the top players where, if I went to the grocery store or, stepped outside of the golf course, no one knew who I was. I've never been recognized in my life. But when you're on the golf course, you are a sort of a default celebrity where if you're inside the ropes and you're one of the people hitting the balls, then they might not know who you are, but they know that you are a player. And sometimes, obviously fans will come up to you and cheer for you, and all of these behaviors that don't seem to make sense to you. Uh, but I also was close to the top players in terms of, I played with some of the top guys, and I, had big tournaments where I was, face to face with them, and I got to see how the crowd treats those guys as well. And that was a really wild experience, just to see up close, what it's like to be a true sort of celebrity, and the downsides of that. I mean, it truly is a curse in some sense. I think regular people, and this is kind of like a childish fantasy that everyone seems to retain into adulthood about celebrity and social status and, being recognized. But I struggle to find any positives in that. Just going to the grocery store or hopping on a flight and having people come up to you and say all sorts of weird, wacky stuff to you. It can't be a fun experience.
It's funny. I remember my first exposure to any real level of like pro golf celebrity was, long story short, I ended up caddying for an amateur in Phil Mickelson's Pro-Am group in 2010 at Quail Hollow. And I remember just being blown away. Like, I remember thinking it was like, it was like people doing the wave at, Fenway Park or wherever, but just all the time. If you're Phil Mickelson and you're walking inside the ropes, or, Tiger was there too, and it was the same thing. But it's like everywhere you go, there's this kind of magnetic effect of people just flock to it. And, whether that is positive or negative, I'm sure there's some of both, but it would have to change you in some deeply fundamental ways, I think.
Yeah, I can't imagine dealing with that for decades like some of those top guys do, and there's different levels of this. I mean, there's sort of the guy who's somewhat known that people will just like yell things out to them for no reason. I've played with, Spieth or Duffner, where it's like people just yell stuff, and you might be known for one specific thing. I don't really know the history of this as much, but like, someone like Ian Poulter, who's somewhat known, but he's more famous for the Ryder Cup, and then people are just yelling stuff at him. It's just that I can't imagine. But then there's the even higher level of that, which is like your Tiger Woods, Phil Mickelson type. And, that's like a whole new level of like people are constantly yelling at you. Like, I, I mean, I guess you learn to tune it out after a while, but I can't imagine that's good for your mental health. Like people are just constantly looking at you and yelling weird things to you. I just can't imagine.
Yeah. Did you get more proximity to this? Because let's see, in 2019, right after you won, I caddied for you actually a few weeks later at the Valspar because you needed a fill in. Suddenly you were into tournaments that you hadn't known you were going to be playing. But you were paired that. Tell me how the tee times work, because suddenly you were paired with like the upper crust, the elite. I know we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but you were playing with Kisner and Luke Donald, for instance, that week when I caddied for you. Is that how it works? That when you win, you get bumped up in tee time quality?
Exactly. Yeah, there's different segments of tea times, different categories, and so I got bumped into the past champion from the last 2 years category, and so all of a sudden I was playing with all of these guys that were very well known. I was never with the top guys. That's like its own special class of tea time. That's those guys. Those are the TV
Yeah, yeah, the TV
TV
featured
based tea
groups.
time. So those guys, they play at a certain time. They spread them out so that there's always, which by the way is another part of the, being a celebrity or being a top player is you essentially get every single one of your shots filmed. So you never really get a break. Everyone else, yeah, sure, if you're contending, you might be on TV, but the rest of the time you're just out there with like, you know, two volunteers and like nine fans that walk the wrong direction, whereas those guys, they're constantly on TV.
Was there anyone that impressed you, or if you want to share someone that you think really handled it poorly? But just that level of celebrity, if they handle it with certain, I don't know, focus or patience or grace.
Yeah, I mean, I remember playing Pebble Beach with Jordan Spieth, and there was just one particularly obnoxious fan that kept yelling at him over and over again. And, after a while, it's like you can't just ignore it. Like you have to address it. And he sort of went over there and kind of told him like, I'll talk to you after the round, or what. This person was aggressively trying to get his autograph, like in the middle of play, and he sort of, kind of politely told him to come after the round. But I mean, yeah, dealing with that, it would drive me crazy. I don't know. I don't know how those guys do it.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess ignoring it is probably a good strategy up to a point, and then eventually you're
Right,
like, all right, I got to do something about this.
right,
Um,
right.
all right, Martin, tell me about your coaching journey and what you've seen from other pros coaching journeys around you. Like what is the truth of being a pro golfer, figuring out your swing coach, figuring out who to work with? Like what's the secret there?
Oh man, if only I had the secret.
Yeah.
If only I had the capital T truth about coaching. Um, it's kind of interesting. I'm not sure what coaching is like in other sports, and I imagine that there's there's also low level coaching happening at the highest levels in other sports too. But I find coaching in golf to be exceptionally poor, to be honest. I think that it's gotten a lot better, and I myself am not someone who has the answers that I can compare, the answers to their answers. I'm coming more from a place of, I don't know exactly what the answer is, but I do know that some of these generalizations that happen, or that coaches talk about aren't true. And so,
This is good. We're mostly a show about raising problems, not finding solutions anyway. So this fits
okay,
right
good,
in.
good. I'll fit right in. Um, yeah, I mean, I think there's different categories of coaches to get into the details. I think there's sort of the old school coach where it was pretty unclear if this is all just random intuition and superstition or if it was real. And I think in the past, certainly like before, the era of technology, cameras. I mean, now people are doing all sorts of biomechanics testing and getting more into the weeds of how a golf ball is actually hit and how a swing functions. But um, you know, back in 2011 when I played my first tour event as an amateur, I think that was kind of still the era of people didn't really know what was going on. And then, coaching did get a little bit better over time. But there was still sort of a category of coaches that have a universal theory about the swing. So they refer to the swing as this thing that everyone can achieve. And I think that's very clear from a player's perspective that that's just completely oversimplified and that not every person can move their body exactly in the same way. There's limits in biomechanics for every single player. So clearly the people that claim universal truths, I grew up watching like stack and tilt commercials. It was like this is how you should swing. And then, many coaches over time have claimed that there's a formula that everyone can achieve, which is very convenient, by the way, because then if a person doesn't achieve it, it just means they didn't do it right. So it gives you
Yeah.
like an automatic
That's on
out.
you. If you couldn't fit
Yeah.
into this template, then well, that's your fault.
Yeah, exactly. And I think now it finally, in modern times with more technology and more sort of study of biomechanics and application of it to golf, I think coaching is getting a little bit better, but there's still degrees of that happening where, some people have segmented people into different categories, and even that is probably too simplistic and limited. I think as a whole, from my own experience, I had different iterations of my swing. When I first got to the PGA Tour, I swung a certain way. Then, 2, 3 years later, it was a little bit different. But noticeably different. And then, a couple of years later, again, it was different. And over time, my body changed and, what I was trying to do in my swing changed a little bit. But, the ball doesn't care what you do. It If it goes straight, it means that you delivered the club with a square face to your target, essentially. And so, there's a lot of theories out there, but overall, I think there's still a lot of mystery in golf with how the swing works, and if there even is the swing, or if it's actually more individualized. The future of golf coaching is probably going to be much more individual focused, your own body, what you can do.
Yeah, I do wonder if things were maybe simpler. I mean, they were definitely simpler, but like if a little bit of information is the most dangerous place to be, like, before you could take a video on your phone, maybe coaches would either be ignorant enough about something that they would either way they would have to make it really simple, probably whatever they were delivering. And then
Right.
once you get the phone and maybe you only have one angle, maybe you have two angles, but you're looking in slow mo, you're not quite getting the full picture. Like, it feels like you know, without force plates or an understanding of 3D motion or something like that, in between could be a very dangerous place to settle. And
Yeah.
certainly, I think about looking with you at swing videos at Memorial in whatever 2020 or wherever we
Yeah.
were, and you trying to figure out, okay, wait, should I be trying to get back to this position? Should I be chasing a feel? Like, is there a secret sauce here? And what the hell is it? And, you know,
Yeah.
clearly from just walking the driving range at any PGA Tour event, almost everyone feels that way to varying degrees.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's definitely the case. I mean, I don't think anyone has truly figured it out. Everyone, has moments where they're off and they're not playing well, and everyone goes to coaches hoping that they can help them. I think that's the great mystery of swinging a golf club is exactly how do you get to be more consistent, and no one has really figured that out. But one thing I do believe, and maybe over time this will be borne out somehow, some sort of science will be done about this at some point. But you know what you just described, the low information, golfing that some people are subscribing to, or some coaches are preaching. you know I do think that every person that makes it to the PGA Tour does so to some degree by accident, by the accident of how their body is and how they swing and how that happens to match up with hitting a golf ball straight. I mean, there's obviously talent involved and a certain amount of athleticism and coordination, but before you even see one of the top coaches, you're probably just some random kid who's 14 years old. So I'm not aware of anyone being manufactured into a PGA Tour player. I'm only aware of people who happen to just swing enough times and intuitively, sometimes even subconsciously, learning how to hit it straight, eventually making the tour, and then going to a top player who will, or sorry, top coach who tell them exactly, the truth about golf. But prior to that, there's all of this intuitive information that they've gathered.
Tell me about pressure, Martin, and playing under pressure, because I mean, you worked your way up the ladder by playing well under pressure, by turning. For a while, it was every time you contended, you won. That happened on the Corn Ferry Tour, where yeah, you played your way in, and then you just went ahead and won. And then you did the same thing on the PGA Tour. But then there have also been times where you've been in the mix and you haven't won, obviously, like anyone. Like the Houston Open comes to mind, or again, like I'm curious how the pressure of playing for your Corn Ferry Tour card compares to playing in front of thousands and thousands of fans at the Zurich against Rory and Shane in a playoff. And yeah, what did you learn about pressure golf?
Um, well, first of all, it's really hard to play under pressure. Everything we just talked about with your mechanics and hitting the ball and all this stuff, a lot of that just goes out the door as soon as there's enough pressure, because your motor skills are impacted by pressure. You know, you're not yourself when you're under pressure. I think one of the things that you can go to your local PGA Tour event and see for yourself is how unbelievably well 95% of the players on the driving range are hitting it at this very moment because the driving range is low stress, flat lie, repetitive. You get feedback, you can instantly correct it. I mean, the shot quality on the range is like night and day compared to an actual tournament when you're under pressure. Um, so that part of it is just another challenge of actually, you know, playing and competing on the PGA Tour. It's not neutral in terms of, you know, your practice and then your play are on the same playing field. That part is is really challenging.
And then what do you feel like elevates it? The stakes of the moment or like the crowd presence or what gets your body into like a different zone the most?
Um, I would say the first tee shot is always like an 8 out of 10. That's always high stress. If you're, you know, if you're trying to make the cut and, you know, you're coming down the stretch, that's also like very high, like an 8 out of 10. The middle parts of the round, especially if you're playing well, you know, that can go down to like a 3 or 4 out of 10. But then once you get to like the very end of a tournament and you're contending, then it's like an 11 out of 10. You know, I remember I was in a playoff at the Zurich, myself and my partner Chad Ramey against McIlroy and Shane Lowry, and I mean, I couldn't feel, I couldn't feel the club basically, you know, and I just remember afterwards, I was like, I just had so little control over what I was doing. I mean, it was truly like what they talk about where like you can't even think. You know, it's like when you're on the range, you can have a swing thought. Here, there was no swing thought. There was just, you know, survival. You know, it's like you're in fight or flight, and you just have to hit this ball. And it really, it's hard. It's hard to simulate that. It's hard to even imagine being in it, but you truly resort to like the most primitive form of like hand-eye coordination at that point. You know, you really can't even attempt to control the club. You're just gonna like swing. It's just one mode. It's just swing. So maybe that's where all the things you were talking about with John Rahm, you know, he doesn't have to think. He just swings.
Yeah, what was the effect of that on that alternate shot hole that you guys played against those two?
You know, mixed. I mean, me personally, I hit a good drive, and then, you know, but then I hit I had a really difficult pitch shot kind of, and I sort of flubbed it. And then I had a putt to tie the hole and move on to the next. And I, you know, it was about 6 feet, and I just completely shoved it to the right. And I think it was just, it's just hard to even control the club at that point. You're just kind of hitting it. And, you know, I think, there's definitely a world where I would have made that putt or, you know, performed better. And there have been times, you know, in my career, when I was trying to win my second Corn Ferry event and I was in contention on this par five, the last hole, I had to hit it to this island green. And if I hit it on the green, I basically was pretty good chance of two putting and winning the tournament and winning by one. And I remember just swinging, and I just happened to, you know, hit a great shot, whatever that was, I don't know, and it went on the green, and I won the tournament. So it's sort of a mixed bag of, that state of mind is really hard to plan.
How did you see guys around you dealing with such a high pressure job? I mean, I know you're not in any way complaining about being a professional golfer, but just the reality is you're playing for your career kind of every week. And how do you cope with that pressure?
Yeah, it's it's really hard. Yeah, it's really hard. I mean, I've definitely seen players, you know, melt down. I've melted down. sometimes you just can't handle it, and you just have those moments where I mean, it's like experiencing the five stages of grief on the golf course. You sort of you get really upset, or you sort of you're so overwhelmed that you become almost detached, and you sort of throw in the towel, or sometimes, I mean, I think this happens somewhat commonly. Sometimes getting upset, being angry is actually a counterweight to the pressure. It's a way of alleviating the pressure where you're upset about your shot, and that puts you in a different state than merely like frightened and nervous. Now you're angry, and you're sort of in degaff mode, and that can sometimes like liberate you a little bit. So I think people do it different ways. I'm not sure exactly, but I know everyone experiences similar things.
I think that's why I would just get in my zone once I just hit like 3 or 4 over par through like 5 holes. My
Yeah, then you're on fire.
totally just pissed off, screw it mode. All right.
Yeah.
You said you learned something about the narratives around play on tour. What do you think you learned there?
Well, one thing that comes to mind when I was growing up is there's always this idea or this term that like the PGA Tour was about bomb and gouge. It was like you just need to hit it far. That's all that matters. If you were to watch the Golf Channel, all the commentators were talking about bombing and gouging. It's like, oh, you don't need to hit fairways. Like, look at all these top players. They're like average to below average in fairway percentage. Um, and so I just always kind of assumed, and I was always a long hitter. I was always on the longer side. And I was like, I'm going to do fine on PGA. I'm just going to hit my drives, and yeah, whatever, I'll hit it in the rough. But, that's just part two of bomb and gouge.
Yeah, it's
Now it's
basically
time
a
to
given.
gouge.
Once you reach a certain swing speed, you're basically guaranteed success. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And I think, in a vacuum, that might be true. But the reason it's true that it's an advantage to hit it farther isn't because you can successfully hit it out of the rough. No one successfully hits it out of the rough. If you hit it in the rough, you're basically screwed. The only advantage of hitting it far is that you're going to have X amount of weeks a year where you do hit it straight. And I think that's a narrative that really burst for me when I got to the PGA Tour. Is I was shocked at how unbelievably straight the top players, including the longest hitters, hit it. When they miss the cut, that's because they missed the fairway. It's not because they didn't bomb and gouge enough. It was really truly there was a premium on hitting the fairway. And I mean, it's more than just hitting it off the tee. There's obviously different aspects of the game, but any narrative that claims that the PGA Tour is just about this or that, I promise you that you have to do every single part of the game well. And, maybe distance is one of those variables that, because it's more concrete, some people simply hit it further than others. It seems like that's just a thing that you need to have. But, it's merely an advantage. You still have to hit it straight, and hit your irons well, and putt well, and chip well. You have to do all those things because there's 150 people in the field. At least a couple of those guys are going to be doing most of those things well. So how are you going to beat them?
Yeah, it's funny. Two things come to mind there. The first being like, I've gotten to do a bunch of these driving range interviews with top pros, and you think of, oh, so and so hits a cut. Chris Gotterup hits a cut off the tee. Like he hits this big slinging cut. And then you get there on the range and you're like, well, that's pretty straight. It just kind of falls to the right at the end, but he can kind of do it like every time when he's on fire. And then I remember the rounds that I caddied for you at the Valspar when we played with Kisner and Luke Donald, and they were both such striking examples of like, yeah, you don't have to be the longest guy as long as you're top 5 in the entire world of anyone in, your short game, your chipping and your putting. And, they both showed off some, Kisner was showing off some magic of just like, yeah, I can hit driver to the center stripe of every fairway. Luke Donald was like chipping and putting, making everything. of like,
Yeah.
it was just such a reminder of, yeah, look, you can make compensations, but only if you're absolutely elite in these other territories. This kind of brings us to our next thing, Martin, which is like, how hard are the courses that you guys are playing? Because we just saw Wyndham Clark just shot. They just underwent a $25 million renovation at TPC Craig Ranch with the stated goal being to make sure that nobody shot 30 under par. And right on cue, Wyndham Clark shot 30 under par exactly to win this golf tournament. But I think if you put someone that was joking about this on the internet on the first tee from the tournament tees tomorrow, I'm not sure that they would shoot their career best round, for example. So how do these courses actually set up?
Uh, yeah, it is hard for people to imagine how hard the courses are. Everything about it is way harder than your local course. I think what's confusing is that you can play your local course and it can also be a par 72, and it can appear to just be another golf course. And you can, in fact, when there isn't a PGA Tour event at that course, go and play it some other month and experience it, but you'll never experience it in the exact same way that we do because the greens are firm, the rough is high, the tees are all the way back. The pins, I mean, just the pins alone are something that, unless you have some sort of special access to the greenskeeper, you will never see the pins in the places that they put them on the PGA Tour. I mean, if you ever just Google pin locations, and you'll see that every single pin is 3 or 4 yards from one of the edges of the green. That means it's like 90% of the way over on one side of the green or another. Um, and I think it's hard to describe exactly like how much harder it is. If you ever just get a get a random PGA Tour player out on like a regular golf course from, not the back tees, you'll see what happens. It's like, they'll shoot at least 6 to 9 under par because there's just no penalty for missing the fairway. There's probably no rough. The greens are soft. If you hit a 4 iron and land it on the green, it'll just stop. There's all these things that accumulate up to it being just so much easier to score. The penalties when you miss a shot on the PGA Tour are just really severe.
And then you mentioned there being three classes of PGA Tour players. What do you mean by that?
You know, I think a lot of people when they're sitting at home watching on TV, they just assume that there's PGA Tour players and then there's just, I guess, non PGA Tour players. But even within the PGA Tour, I think there's different lifestyles. There's the top players who are getting constantly interviewed, constantly hounded. They're probably flying private, staying at like a really nice house that they rented for kind of a lot of money, but they are able to do that. They might even have a chef. They have this lifestyle that's a little bit different. Then there's the middle class, which is people who fly commercial, who are obviously doing really well and probably keeping their card for many years. But they're staying at nice hotels, and they have some of those perks, but they don't have like the entourage of the top player. The top players, when you're in dining, the top player's got his agent, he's got his coach there, he's got some media person there with him. There's just kind of like there it's a different deal. They have more responsibilities, they have more interviews to do. And then there's the likes of me, who are what you would only describe as just a regular person who happens to be on the PGA Tour. Like, I'm on Priceline trying to find good deals for hotels. I'm splitting Airbnbs with some other players. I'm, trying to save money, cut costs. I'm just doing regular, just like how people travel for business. That's how I travel for business. I'll just fly economy because the Southwest flight was $100. So I think there's different classes of people out there, and it's a very different experience, I think, playing within those three different general categories.
Yeah, Joel Damon talks about there being a PGA tour and a PGB tour. Maybe you're saying there's also a PGC tour, which is like
Yeah.
kind of just trying to make it around as smartly as you can. And you would tap into host housing sometimes too, right?
Right, right. Yeah, yeah. I've definitely done more than my fair share of that over the years.
Yeah, I mean because it is so expensive. Do you have an estimation of how expensive it was, like each year that you were on tour? I mean, I'm sure it would vary based on what tournaments you were going to, what continents you were going to. But do you know how much it costs to be a pro golfer?
I mean, right off the bat, you're paying your caddy, and depending on, how well you play that year, you might be paying him, if you miss every cut, you're still paying him probably 70,000, but then, that could be 200,000 if you're playing really well. So there's that. But then just the expenses themselves, yeah, I mean, you're probably spending 50 to 100,000 and more, depending on how many entourage people you have. If you have your coach and your agent and all this stuff, I mean, you're paying those people a lot. So yeah, it's at the lowest levels, if you just have a coach that you pay a little bit and you're a caddy and you're not making that many cuts, I mean, you're still spending probably 100,000, and then way more than that if you have all the bells and whistles.
And then a simple but impossible question: what made you so good that you were able to get to this level? And then also, what kept you from being Scotty Scheffler, say?
um it's kind of a mystery. uh Unclear on both counts. Yeah, I mean, getting to the PGA Tour, I just have some sort of combination of athleticism and, just my body happens to be a certain way where, it's conducive to swinging a club at high speed. I mean, there's lots of people who are athletic in other ways, but they can't generate speed. And then there's people who are dumpy on the outside. I mean, not seemingly in good shape, and yet they can generate a lot of speed. So there's something with mechanics that's going on there. Different flexibility, mobility, different range of motion in just the right areas, whether it's your wrists, your legs, your torso, your hips, all that is adding up to somehow long drives or not. And then, same thing with putting. I mean, how do you predict if someone's going to be a good putter? I have no idea. You just do it after a long time. And, I grew up, played in high school, played in college, progressed over time. Clearly had these, tools of I was a very good putter and I could hit a long way, and eventually made it up there. As far as why am I not Scotty Scheffler, I think it's just the same reasoning. I mean, Rom doesn't have a swing thought or has one swing thought. I mean, he's just going out there and he's swinging and he's swinging at crazy high speeds. He's a talented putter. I mean, there's just something about that I think is still somewhat mysterious. And, I think a lot of people try to, inject narratives about character and work ethic and all these things. And there's a minimum of that's involved. I did practice a lot growing up, and you do have to have your head on straight to some degree, but yeah, there is kind of a mystery about it all.
Fascinating. And I guess, is there one part of the game that jumps out to you as like most important? You have to be good at everything, like you said, but like to make it as a good player in the world and on the PGA Tour, is there something that you really just need to be almost unbelievably good at?
Everything.
Everything.
It's there's there's no way to have a weakness in this sport. If you have a glaring weakness, you won't even make it to the PGA Tour. I encountered these guys playing the Latin Tour, playing, the mini tours, Corn Ferry. I met lots of people that hit it a long way, hit their irons unbelievably well, were incredible putters, but every single one of those people that never made it had a huge hole in their game. They couldn't do one of the, general categories of minimum competence that's required to be on the PGA Tour. You have to be good. And then, there's obviously extremes. I mean, there's been top players. Jim Furyk was a top player for many years, and he was not long off the tee. He was one of the shortest players. But, there are these like edge cases of extreme strengths and weaknesses. And, for him particularly, he is probably one of the straightest drivers and iron players that's ever played and an unbelievable putter. So there's some compensation that happened there.
What's next for Martin Trainer, and why? Where are you headed? What are you thinking of, and what's pushing you there?
Well, I mean, I had this whole experience of playing on the PGA Tour. That was really cool. I think I learned a lot. I learned a lot about myself. I learned a lot about sort of the limits of celebrity. We talked about wealth to some extent. Isn't everything in the world. What good is it to be making jillions of dollars playing on the PGA Tour if you're just going to be traveling around and staying at hotels? That's not there's obviously it's great in many ways, but it's also a challenge in many ways, and there's things that you miss out on. But I want to have a normal life. I want to have, I want to get married. I'm getting married this summer. I want to have kids. I want to, be at home and watch them grow up. And, I want to have a job that I'm interested in. We talked about how I'm going to go to grad school and, learn a thing or two about psychology, hopefully. And I think it'd be cool to help people with their journey.
All right, well, Martin, we wish you all the best in your next chapter here. Maybe the Dethier Trainer comeback tour. We'll see when that fires up. But in the meantime, to bigger and better things. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.